Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tale, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, and shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late. Now let's get into today's tale. They say funerals bring people together, but the day we buried my father, I realized something else. Grief doesn't always unite. Sometimes it exposes what's been waiting to break free. I stood by his casket, surrounded by men in expensive suits, distant cousins I hadn't seen in years, and colleagues who whispered about net worth more than memories. The room smelled like roses and quiet betrayal. My name is Emma Whitmore, and this is the story of how my brother tried to take everything my father built. But I took it back, one truth at a time. I wasn't always the strongest or the loudest, but I was the one who stayed. The one who followed my dad through early mornings and late-night strategy calls. The one who ran operations while my brother Ethan played heir from a yacht in Monaco. So when I walked into my father's office the morning after his funeral and saw Ethan in his chair, sipping his whiskey, I knew this wasn't just grief. This was war. He thought I'd fall apart. But what he didn't know was I'd already made my move. They say funerals bring people together, but for some families, they don't bring unity. They bring opportunity. Opportunity to claim, to whisper, to position. And that's exactly what happened when my father, Joe Ethan Whitmore, died. It was a gray morning. The sky hung low over the chapel. Even the air felt hesitant. Inside, the room was packed. Rows of somber suits, designer handbags, perfume that tried to mask tension, but failed. Old business partners nodded politely, their eyes more curious than kind. Distant relatives dabbed dry eyes with silk handkerchiefs. And board members, they watched me and him, Ethan. My older brother stood at the edge of the sanctuary, hands in his pockets, sunglasses on indoors, while I clutched the memorial booklet like it might keep me standing. He leaned against a marble column like this was just another business brunch. He didn't cry. He didn't even pretend to. Because Ethan didn't come to mourn our father, he came to inherit him. Emma pauses, piano softens. For the past 6 years, I'd worked beside Dad, day in, day out. I ran logistics, rewrote vendor contracts, stayed up rebalancing quarterly reports. While Ethan flew off to Ibiza on networking retreats, he spent money like it came from a faucet. I earned every inch of trust. Dad never said it out loud, but he didn't have to. I saw it in how he looked at me during meetings, how he asked for my opinion before signing anything big. So I thought maybe that meant something. But the look Ethan gave me across the chapel that day, that grin, that quiet arrogance, told me otherwise. He knew something I didn't, and I felt it in my bones. This wasn't over. It hadn't even started. The next morning, I woke up in a fog, like grief had replaced oxygen in my lungs. Still, I did what I always did. I drove to the office, same parking spot, same badge, beep at the elevator, same walk through the glass hallway with Dad's name, etched above the door. But this time, no one looked at me. The receptionist avoided my eyes. The building manager gave me a quick nod, then turned away. Even the junior analyst I trained last year suddenly found her phone very interesting. I remember thinking, what's going on? Then I stepped into the executive wing, and I saw it. Dad's office, our office, was open. The door, usually kept shut tight unless he was inside, was wide, like a challenge. And there was Ethan, reclined in Dad's leather chair, feet up on the desk, swirling 20-year-old scotch in the crystal glass we only ever brought out to celebrate new acquisitions. He didn't flinch when he saw me, didn't apologize, just raised his glass. "Just getting comfortable," he said. I stood frozen in the doorway. "That's not your office." He laughed, a deep, smug laugh that echoed in the room, like he'd been practicing it. Then he reached into the desk drawer, Dad's drawer, and pulled out a folder, pushing it across the desk toward me. I didn't want to look, but I did. The will, notarized, legal, and on it, Ethan's name. The estate, the company, the accounts, all of it. I read the words twice, 3 times, like I could change them by blinking hard enough, my father's name, his signature, his last wishes, and they didn't include me. When I finally looked up, Ethan leaned in and whispered, "I own everything now." Then he tilted his head, mock sympathy in his voice. "You have nothing." If this had been 5 years ago, I might have cried, might have screamed. But I didn't. I laughed. And Ethan, bless his arrogant little heart, had no idea why. Because while he was off preparing to collect, I was preparing to protect. While he was playing the long game of inheritance, I was playing the smarter game of structure. I sat down across from him, crossed my legs like it was just another meeting, and then pulled out my phone. One swipe, an email from Whitmore Enterprises. "Legal team." I watched his face twitch as he read the subject line. Operational authority. CEO succession clause activation. I turned the screen toward him. His eyes scanned the words, and I could see his smirk starting to fade. Our father, Joe Ethan Whitmore, had named Ethan as heir, yes. But he had also, 1 week before his death, signed over power of attorney to me, because he knew something Ethan didn't. That power on paper is worthless if the people behind the paper don't respect you. And the board? They respected me. Per company bylaws, no one becomes CEO automatically, not even heirs. The board has to approve. And until then, operational control rests with the person named in the active POA. Me. Ethan blinked once. What does this mean? I smiled, slow and steady. It means you've got a title, Ethan, but I've got the team. Emma exhales gently. I didn't need revenge in that moment. What I needed was already happening. Because real power, it's not loud, it's not flashy. It doesn't show up in sunglasses at funerals. It shows up in preparation. And while Ethan thought I was grieving, I was already moving. Music builds gently towards suspense. The board meeting was set for the next morning. And if he thought this email was bad, he had no idea what was coming next. Ethan didn't say much after reading the email. He sat there blinking, trying to process what had just happened. But I didn't wait for him to catch up, because the board meeting was set for 9 a.m. the next morning. In that room full of seasoned executives, most of whom had built this company with my father, brick by brick, titles didn't matter as much as track records. Ethan had a last name, had a resume. That morning, I arrived at headquarters before sunrise. The air outside was cool, crisp, the kind of air that clears your thoughts. I stood alone in the parking lot for a few seconds, looking up at the building. The Whitmore logo gleamed faintly in the glass, gold and bold against the gray sky. I whispered under my breath, "All right, Dad, let's finish this." Soft sound of footsteps cut to interior. Inside the boardroom, the tension was thick. 10 men and women sat around the long mahogany table. Some of them had known me since I was the intern who fetched coffee and never left until every spreadsheet was cross-checked. Others had questioned why Joe Ethan had let his daughter climb so fast. Today, they were all watching. Ethan strolled in late, of course. Wrinkled collar, his red tie probably whiskey-stained. He took his seat across from me and flashed a tired grin. "Well, let's get this over with," he said. Mr. Langston, the chairman, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, folded his hands and began. "We are here to determine who is best suited to lead Whitmore Enterprises into its next chapter." Then he turned to me. "Emma, you may begin." I didn't stand. I didn't need to. I simply opened a folder and began placing documents on the table, one by one. "These," I said, sliding the first packet forward, "are financial records from the past 4 years. They show a consistent pattern of reckless personal spending from Ethan, funded illegally through company accounts." Ethan's face tensed. Next, I continued. "Emails from the finance department warning about these misappropriations. Ignored." Finally, I placed the last page on the table. An attempt to liquidate $10 million of company assets 1 week before our father passed. The room went still. Ethan leaned forward, his voice rising. "You had no right to dig through my personal," I cut in calmly. "I didn't need to. Finance came to me. They were scared, and for good reason." One of the board members, a quiet man named Davis who rarely spoke, cleared his throat. "All of this is verified," he said, nodding. "Every number, every transaction, every signature." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He looked around the room, hoping for an ally. There was none. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't about family anymore. It wasn't even about grief. It was about trust. Emma's voice softened slightly. "See, trust is currency in business. It's not earned with charm or bloodlines. It's earned by showing up, by doing the hard, unglamorous work when no one's watching." Ethan thought being a Whitmore made him untouchable. But our last name wasn't what built this company. Discipline did, loyalty did, hard choices did. Mr. Langston sat back in his chair, looking over the documents quietly. Finally, he said, "Emma, if the board votes in your favor, what is your plan moving forward?" I didn't hesitate. Stability. I said, "Transparency and rebuilding trust with our investors, our employees, and our clients." He nodded slowly, then turned to Ethan. "And you?" Ethan swallowed, looked down at his hands, and said nothing. Because by then, even he knew it was over. Langston looked around the table. "Let's vote." I didn't even need to count the hands because the decision was unanimous. Brief silence, then a deep breath from Emma. And just like that, the board chose me. The moment Ethan stood up and pushed his chair back, it felt like something shifted, in the air. He leaned toward me as he passed, his voice low and bitter. "You think this is over?" I looked up, calm and certain. "No, Ethan, I think it just started." Pause. Music begins to build again. Because the boardroom was just the first battlefield, and now it was time to deal with everything Ethan had broken. When the board voted me in as interim CEO, the room didn't erupt in applause. There were no high fives or champagne bottles waiting in the wings. Just quiet nods, a shift in posture, and the unmistakable feeling of something real beginning. But I knew better than to let relief fool me. Because power, even when given unanimously, can still be challenged. Especially by someone like Ethan, who was raised to believe entitlement was a birthright. He stormed out of that room, face red, eyes sharp, already plotting his next move. And me? I stayed seated, collected the documents, took a breath, and pulled out one more envelope. Cloth pause, flick of paper, music dips briefly. See, I'd saved this for last, because it wasn't a defense, it was a warning. I turned to Mr. Langston and the board. "There's one more matter to address," I said. "This." I slid the envelope across the table. "This is a formal request for a forensic audit of all financial activity authorized by Ethan Whitmore in the past 24 months. There was a moment of silence. Not shocked silence, but something heavier, like everyone in that room had suspected, but no one had dared to ask. Langston leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Are you suggesting embezzlement?" I didn't blink. "I'm saying the numbers don't lie, and if Ethan has nothing to hide, he won't mind us checking." Emma's voice deepened slightly, controlled, but serious. "Here's the thing most people don't understand about accountability. It isn't revenge. It isn't cruelty. It's structure. Structure that protects everyone, from investors to interns. And Ethan had broken that structure the minute he started treating company accounts like his own personal wallet. Luxury yacht rentals labeled as client engagement. Private chefs billed under executive wellness. An entire condo in the city, paid for in full under the guise of remote work support." She shakes her head. "He wasn't just reckless. He was audacious. The audit wasn't about humiliating him. It was about making a clear statement. This company is no longer a playground." Across the table, I watched Davis, usually so reserved, nod slowly as he flipped through the preliminary audit documents. Langston looked to the others. They didn't hesitate. "Proceed," he said. And just like that, the move was made. Strategic, final, checkmate. Emma breathed slowly, her voice gentler now. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the moment that audit was approved, His future at Whitmore Enterprises officially ended, because a title can't protect you from the truth, and money, especially stolen money, never stays quiet for long. She pauses. I didn't gloat, didn't smile. I just gathered my things, stood, and walked out. Because I wasn't here to celebrate a win. I was here to clean up a mess. And the real work? It was just beginning. Before we continue, I want to pause and ask you, what would you have done in my place? If someone you trusted, someone you shared your childhood with, sat in your father's chair and tried to erase everything you'd earned, would you walk away, or would you fight back? Go ahead, leave a comment below. Tell me what you feel about this moment. Have you ever been underestimated until it was too late? I'd love to hear your story. Beach balloon. And if this part hit you hard, don't forget to like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. After the board approved the audit, I didn't rush to tell Ethan. Some people think the most powerful moment is the announcement, but I've learned it's the silence right before. The moment you let someone feel the weight of their own actions before the consequences arrive. I gave it 3 days. 3 days for the investigation to begin. 3 days for whispers to circulate. 3 days for Ethan to realize no one was returning his calls. On the 4th day, I drove to the estate. The one Dad had loved. The one Ethan had inherited on paper, but never truly earned. She pauses. The music softens to a hush. I didn't knock. I walked through the heavy oak doors like I used to as a teenager. Except now, everything inside felt colder. The study, once filled with my father's books and his worn leather chair, now held cluttered paperwork, an empty decanter, and my brother, half sitting, half slumped on the couch. He didn't even look surprised to see me, didn't ask why I came. He just muttered, "Here to gloat?" I looked at him for a long second. The once polished air was gone. In its place, a man who had lost everything, but didn't know how to admit it. Emma's tone softens, not out of pity, but clarity. "No," I said, walking to the desk. "I'm here to talk about your options." Ethan scoffed. "What options?" I pulled out a file and laid it flat in front of him. The audit team had already traced over $4.3 million in unauthorized withdrawals, funds funneled through shell accounts, fake consulting invoices, and offshore transfers. And they're just getting started. He stared at the folder like it might disappear if he blinked long enough. If the board files charges, I continued, we're looking at embezzlement, fraud, prison time. He swallowed hard, his hands trembling, as he flipped through the pages. "This is exaggerated," he mumbled. "These were company perks. Executives do this all the time." I looked him straight in the eyes. Not here, not anymore. Music shifts slightly. Slower, heavier chords. Then I gave him the offer. "You still own shares, Ethan. Legally, that's all you've got left. You sign them over quietly, and I'll convince the board not to press charges." His voice cracked. "You do that?" "I do that, for the company, not for you." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the edge of the desk. "Because unlike you, I care more about protecting Dad's legacy than watching you burn." There was a long silence. He looked down at the pen, then back up at me. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't offer a smile. I just waited. And finally, he signed. One signature, one last line. "Goodbye." Soft breath. Piano fades down to a gentle hum. As I took the folder and stood to leave, he asked, almost whispering, "Was this what you wanted? To destroy me?" I stopped at the door. "No," I said. "I wanted to save what you never deserved to break." Then I walked out. Music gently swells, the tone shifts, not of anger, but closure. That was the day the Whitmore legacy finally came back into the right hands, not through revenge, but through responsibility. Because sometimes the most powerful move you can make isn't punishing someone. It's removing their ability to hurt, what matters ever again. When I left Ethan behind in our father's study, I didn't look back. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't afford to. There was no victory parade, No moment to celebrate, just a mountain of work waiting for me. One signature closer to peace, but still far from stability. Ethan had been removed from power. His shares were mine. But the damage he'd left behind? That was still very real. Pause. Deep breath. I returned to Whitmore Enterprises the next morning at 6:45 a.m. Not because I had to, because I always did. It was the same building, but something felt different now. The looks people gave me in the lobby, uncertain at first, started to shift. From confusion to recognition, from hesitation to hope. I gathered my executive team at 8 a.m. sharp. Half of them looked exhausted, the other half cautiously optimistic. Emma's voice becomes more intentional as if re-entering that room. "We have 3 priorities," I told them. 1, stop the bleeding. 2, rebuild the trust. And 3, reclaim the vision. Because Ethan hadn't just misused money. He'd damaged morale, started vanity projects that made no sense, fired experienced managers to bring in his friends, and pushed marketing campaigns that were more about ego than results. She chuckles softly. There was a luxury lifestyle app in development that had burned through $400K and never even launched. So we began the cleanup. I cut every vanity project within the first 48 hours, launched a full departmental audit, brought back 3 senior staffers Ethan had let go, people with institutional knowledge, people who actually knew how this company ran. I met with every division face to face, not just the executives, the interns, the assistants, the engineers. I asked questions, I listened, and I did something Ethan never once thought to do. I earned their trust by showing up. Soft, proud pause. One by one, the lights started coming back on. Departments stopped working in fear. Investors who were on the verge of pulling out stayed. In fact, after 2 weeks of stabilizing, our share price bumped up by 3.2%. Small, maybe, but symbolic. Because when trust returns, so does momentum. Emma's voice softens, genuine and warm. People often think rebuilding is about bold moves, but it's not. It's about consistency. One honest conversation at a time. One careful decision at a time. One late-night email you send, not because it's expected, but because it's right. That's how we brought Whitmore Enterprises back. Slowly, the company started to look like my father again. Not in the decor, not in the branding, but in its values. In the way people treated one another. In the way problems were solved without finger-pointing. In the quiet pride of walking down the hallway, knowing we were building something that mattered. Short, reflective pause. And through it all, I kept Dad's photo on my desk. The same one that used to sit on his. He once told me, "A legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you set in motion." That was the heartbeat of everything. I did. Music shifts gently, rising with a sense of arrival. But the journey wasn't over yet. There was still one voice I hadn't heard from, one loose thread left untied. And when the phone rang from a number I didn't recognize, I had a feeling it would lead me to the final chapter. The thing about storms is they never leave right away. Even when the sky's clear, the ground stays wet. You still hear echoes of thunder long after the clouds have passed. That's what it felt like in the weeks after Ethan was gone. The company was breathing again. People were smiling in the elevators. Departments were humming with the sound of momentum returning. But I knew it wasn't quite over. Not yet. And sure enough, on a Tuesday, late afternoon, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. For half a second, I considered ignoring it, but something in me said, "Pick up." Off click. Long silence. "Emma," the voice said. Familiar. "Hello, Ethan." I didn't say anything at first. He let out a breath, like he'd been holding it for days. I lost everything. And for a moment, I heard not the man who tried to steal our father's legacy, but the boy I grew up with. The one who used to beg me to cover for him when he snuck out past curfew. The one who, at some point, got lost in all the expectations. Emma's voice softens, almost nostalgic. "I thought if I got the company, it would fix everything," he said. "Make me feel like I was worth something." I leaned back in my chair, fingers resting gently against my temple. Dad never cared about titles, Ethan. He cared about the people who built them. Long pause. I know that now. But the truth is, maybe he did. Or maybe it was just regret talking. Regret has a way of arriving too late, dressed like wisdom. Emma exhales slowly. He didn't ask for money, didn't ask for his shares back. He just said, "I don't expect you to forgive me." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Good," I said softly. Then, a silence. Until finally he said, "Goodbye, Emma." And that was it. No grand apology, no redemption arc, just a voice from the past letting go. Pause, piano. Grows slightly stronger. I stared at my phone for a long time after he hung up. Not because I missed him, but because I finally understood something. Not everyone who starts with you is meant to finish with you. Ethan had been my brother by blood, but our paths, they split long before the will, long before the boardroom, long before either of us even noticed. Emma's voice steadies, warmer again. And that realization didn't come with pain. It came with peace, because I had a different family now. A company that trusted me, a team that believed in me, and a father's legacy that no longer felt like a burden to protect, but a future to build. Music shifts, brighter, hopeful, a sense of light ahead. The next week, I stood in front of the entire company. Employees from every floor filled the auditorium. I stepped to the microphone, held my notes tight, then looked up and realized I didn't need them. Because this was where the story turned from survival to leadership. The week after Ethan's call, I stood behind the same podium my father had used for over a decade. It was our company's quarterly all-hands meeting, but that day it wasn't about metrics. It was about something much deeper. I looked out over the sea of faces, some familiar, some new. The engineers who'd stayed through the chaos, the assistants who held the place together while everything else fell apart, the senior partners who had once doubted me, now seated in the front row. And for a moment, I felt him. Not just as a memory, but as a presence. Emma exhales softly. I didn't bring notes, didn't need a script. I just spoke from where it all started. This company I began was built by a man who believed in hard work, second chances, and showing up when no one else would. Some of you knew him as your boss. I knew him as my father. The room goes quiet, not out of obligation, but out of respect. He never asked for perfection, but he expected effort. And he taught me that legacy isn't just what you leave behind. It's what you set in motion. Pause, scanning the room. These past few months haven't been easy. We've lost time, we've lost money, but we haven't lost our values. Music swells subtly beneath her words. Starting today, we're not going back to the way things were. We're going forward. Better, clearer, stronger, not because of a last name, but because of shared purpose. I could feel the weight of every story that had brought us to this moment. The layoffs Ethan approved without warning, the departments that nearly fell apart, the people who stayed anyway because they believed in something more than a paycheck. This isn't just my father's company anymore, it's ours. And I promise you this, we will never again confuse entitlement with leadership. Emma's voice softens, personal, like a final note to a friend. We will build something lasting together, not because we have to, but because we can. The room breaks into quiet applause, gradually building. Music lifts. A moment of stillness follows. That speech wasn't about power, it was about stewardship, about knowing that real leadership doesn't scream, it listens, doesn't flaunt, it shows up, doesn't inherit, it earns. Emma pauses gently. I didn't just keep my father's legacy alive. I evolved it. And in doing so, found my own. Music begins to fade into a final instrumental swell. But before the lights dimmed, before the crowd dispersed, I returned to my office one last time and placed my father's photo on the desk. The same place it always sat, but this time it felt different. It didn't feel like I was filling his shoes anymore. It felt like I had built a pair of my own. Short pause, soft exhale. After the speech, I didn't go to lunch. I didn't answer emails. I didn't check the stock ticker. I just walked back to my office. Our office. The one with glass walls and that quiet hum from the city below. The same room that used to belong to my father, and for a short while, nearly belonged to someone who didn't deserve it. I closed the door, sat down, and for the first time in what felt like years, I let myself be still. Short pause. There's something sacred about a desk. People think it's just wood and drawers, but really, it's a witness. To the early mornings, the impossible decisions, the contracts that saved, a company, the letters that said goodbye. My father built an empire from this chair. He signed checks, fired people, hired people, made hard choices, and kept harder promises. And now, here I was, sitting in the same chair, but not as his shadow, as myself. Quiet beat. I turned my head toward the window. From the 42nd floor, the city looked smaller, less intimidating, and yet more full of possibility. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a framed photo. It was the two of us, Dad and me, at the company's 20th anniversary gala. I was 15, wearing a too-tight dress and a nervous smile. He had his hand on my shoulder, proud, tired, amused, like he already knew the storm I'd weather. I set the photo back on the desk in the exact same spot he used to keep it. Not because I wanted to copy him, but because some things don't need to be reinvented. Some things are worth preserving. And as the sunlight warmed the edge of the desk, I whispered one last promise, just for him. I've got it from here. Music swells gently, then slowly fades to near silence. They say every empire is one generation away from collapse. But what they forget is that some legacies don't live in vaults or boardrooms. They live in the people who refuse to give up on what matters, who lead when it's hard, who stay when it's lonely, who choose to build when it's easier to walk away. That was my choice. And now that is my story. Brief pause. Music shifts into the final warm refrain. Emma, direct to audience. Thank you. Staying with me through this journey, if there's one thing I hope you carry from it, it's this. Leadership isn't about control, it's about courage. And legacies, they aren't inherited, they're earned, every single day. I'd love to hear what this story meant to you. Have you ever had to rebuild something someone else tried to ruin? Or prove you were more than what people expected? Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this story. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Power isn't given. It's earned. Through patience, resilience, and standing your ground when it matters most. Sometimes the people who underestimate us the most are the ones closest to us. But that doesn't mean we break. It means we rise. Now, I want to hear from you. What part of this story hit home for you? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight for what was rightfully yours? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments. I read them all, and your stories truly matter. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories just like this one. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and never let anyone write your ending for you.